We're now going to turn our attention to a tool designed to help communities as they face their challenges in terms of looking at their own health needs assessments and identifying those areas that they could target for healthcare improvements that will provide the best payback. And as you can imagine, as you look at all the data that you are presented, there's a myriad of opportunities. And how do you pick the best one? Where do we invest the most important scarce resources that we have to get the best bang for the buck, if you will? So scenario planning, which is commonly referred to as the art of the long view, is very, very important because it provides that perspective and tools in order to make that happen and to achieve the best outcome. And as you can see on this slide, we've identified some key assumptions about scenario planning, as well as observations about how to best use the tool. And it really begins with all thinking is incomplete, so therefore all decisions are flawed. And when you think about that, it basically says that we have to optimize, that is, create the best potential opportunity, not the only solution, but the best potential. And that there's an inherent risk associated if we are acting on expediency and only looking at one solution rather than trying to come up some options to consider the best one. So scenario planning takes into account the variety of factors that are really the environmental drivers that influence not only the current environment, but it also gives us an opportunity to come up with a variety of combinations in which to consider looking forward. We're going to turn now to the next slide because the next slide sort of does two things. It sort of says, first off, there's a way of looking at this perspective of scenario planning and seeing that there's a lot of different potential opportunities we may face, and these might be better than any of the others that we might consider. So it's a function of planning variables and environmental complexities. Those are the key elements. And below that, you will see a diagram that outlines the steps that we recommend in using scenario planning for your own decisioning process. Now, before we go forward, let us let you know this is just one model. There's a whole variety of models out there you can use. We picked this one because we think it's simple, it's straightforward, and it provides you with a very logical process of working through, defining potential scenarios, and then capitalizing on the investment of your scarce resources to achieve the best possible outcome. So as you can see, the first one is, what is the area we're going to focus on? And I think this next step, the key driving forces are really important because if you go back to our little tool called the iceberg, that's a great application for that tool at that particular point in this effort because it gives you an opportunity to really get below the surface and not deal with just the symptoms that you're dealing with, but the underlying root causes of what's really going on. And then once you've identified those key drivers, what is the impact that each of those has and what's both the positive and negative? So you could use, again, another tool, force field analysis, so forth and so on. The next step is to develop 2 to 3 scenarios. We would recommend 3 if you could. First off, it really sort of forces you and your team to really stretch your thinking, and sometimes you'd be surprised the great things you can come up with. And then the next step is to take those and refine down through a decision process that everybody agrees to use to rule out those scenarios that don't seem to be the most appropriate. And then we start looking at challenges and opportunities and then implementation. We don't get into the implementation part. That's something that we assume that you can use your own model that you typically use. If you need help, you can go do a search for that. So when you think about potential scenarios, here's a diagram on the left part of this page that really deals with two dimensions. One is uncertainty. In other words, what is the likelihood that the scenarios that we're coming up with are actually going to have a real impact in terms of a degree of causal connection between what we do and the outcome we're pursuing. And then secondly, what is the real impact? So we've given sort of three clusters here. One is insignificant, one is most likely, but not necessarily a lot of impact, and this one, the third one, is the one where you have the greatest impact. And the idea is, again, groupthink, if you will, to come up with a series of criteria on how you're going to make your decision, and then move from there into the next diagram, the little graphic that says, okay, if we look at the performance and impact, levels of performance and impact over a period of time, then what is the scenario that gives us the best bang for the buck? And in this case, we've identified scenario B. Even though it starts out slow at the beginning, as you can see, its trajectory at some point really starts taking off, and it results in an outcome that is much better than the other two. And so those are the things that we think are important. And as you start thinking about how you as an organization lead your community in doing healthcare reform and picking out some health inequalities, for example, or opportunities for improvement of care, that you use scenario planning as a very effective tool. We think the last slide really sums up that scenarios really are stories. It's an opportunity to have a dialogue. It's not about scientific analysis. That's a part of it. But this is really a part about gut feeling. And as leaders, we all know that sometimes our gut tells us one thing when we think something else makes sense because of objectivity. But in the final analysis, it's the gut that really gives us the motivation to do what we think is the right thing. We hope this is helpful. Again, it's a great tool. Scenario planning is the art of looking at the long view, not the short view, not expediency, but where do you get the best return on the investment. Good luck and best wishes.